You know, when you think of the English countryside, you think of thatched roofs and winding lanes and, nice country pubs. You don't think of an old man going into a field and getting stabbed through the face with a pitchfork and then his throat slashed with a trouncing hook. Charles Walton was a 74-year-old farm laborer. He was a widower. His wife had died in 1927, and so he lived with his young niece, Edith. And his cottage is across the street from the church at Lower Quinton. You can still see it there. It's white, thatched roof, very pretty. And he had a job trimming hedges in a field for a local farmer named ALFRED John Potter. The field was sort of at the base of Mound Hill, not on the hill itself. And he'd get up every morning and he'd leave his cottage at about 8:15 in the morning and walk off into the fields to start his day's work. And he'd usually be back by nightfall. And Charles Walton, like I said, he was 74 years old. He was arthritic, so he wasn't in the best of shape. And so Wednesday, February 14th, 1945, was a day like any other. Charles Walton got up. His niece made him breakfast. He eats it, and he leaves his cottage. And as he left his cottage, his niece watched him leave, as she always did. Edith went off to her job that morning, and she got home from work at about 6 o'clock in the evening. And usually when she got home, Charles Walton was usually home from work. He always got home before nightfall. But that evening when he wasn't home, which caused some alarm. So she called out his name. There was no answer. So she went to the cottage next door, which was owned by a man named Harry Beasley, who had known Charles Walton for many years. And she said, can you help me find him? And they couldn't find him. So they knocked on the door of the Firs, which was the name of the farm operated by ALFRED John Potter. They knock on his door at about 6:15 in the evening. And they say, Charles hasn't come home. Can you help us find him? We think something's happened. So Potter, Harry Beasley, and Edith, Charles's niece, they set off into the fields looking for him. And of course, by now it's dark, hard to see, kind of foggy. And Potter leads them to a field where he'd seen Walton working that day. And at the corner where two hedges intersect, they find Charles Walton. And he's lying there on the ground. His pitchfork has been driven through his face, and his trouncing hook has been buried into his throat. The case has remained unsolved, and because of that, it's generated a lot of interest. The reason people are interested in this case is because it's unsolved. It's like the Jack the Ripper murder. If we knew who Jack the Ripper was, if police had discovered back then who Jack the Ripper was, we probably wouldn't care about it today. But it's because there's this strange air of mystery that lingers over the thing that it continues to fascinate us. And what's really fascinating about the Lower Quinton case is all the myths and legends that have sprung up around it. A lot of people today now believe that it was a witchcraft killing. A lot of accounts of the case say that Charles Walton was found in a field underneath a willow tree, which has significance in witchcraft and magic, and that his pitchfork had been driven through him, which was true, but that he'd been slashed with the signs of the cross and that he had crosses carved into all his flesh. That was not true. Some accounts say he was murdered at midnight as part of a ritual. He wasn't. According to the autopsy report, he was probably murdered sometime between noon and 2 p.m. on the afternoon of February 14th. And then there are rumors about Charles Walton himself. Many claim that he was a warlock, a male witch, and that many people in the village stayed clear of him because they thought he had these weird mythical powers. There's no evidence of that in the police file either. As I stated, 493 people in the village were interviewed, and none of them had anything derogatory to say about Charles Walton. He was a harmless old man. He was well liked. He kept to himself. Where the rumors of witchcraft crop up about Charles Walton, it's kind of hard to say. In the years after the murder, a lot of the tabloid newspapers in London started reporting stories from, sort of various crazy people who came out of the woodwork saying they were members of black magic cults who had taken part in the Walton murder. But there's no hard evidence that that's the case.
St. Valentine's Day in 1945 fell on Ash Wednesday, a day particularly rich in black magic associations. It was the day when the Druids were reported to have made sacrifice to the earth. They killed their victim with a knife and allowed his blood to drain away, to replenish the fertility of the soil. Charles Walton's case aroused the interest of Margaret Murray, the celebrated Egyptologist and archaeologist. She was then in her 90s, but she came down to the village to stay there and investigate the case personally. And she said that she was 95% certain that the killing was a witchcraft killing. With me now is the person who knew him most and best, his niece, Mrs. Good. Mrs. Good, Charles Walton was living with you at the time of the murder.
Yes.
Do you think that there was any chance that witchcraft played any part in his death at all?
No. I think the papers made a lot of it. And I lived with him all my life, and I've never known such things. I think it's ridiculous, really, the things that were said.
What did you think about the theories in the newspapers?
No, what the paper said was very disturbing, because none of it was true.
Warwickshire is supposed to have been one of the great centres of witchcraft. Did you ever meet a witch or know anything about witchcraft?
No, never. I've never heard of it. I never remember them talking about witchcraft till this came along.
The police, they can't do much. The Warwickshire Police Department isn't well equipped to handle this investigation. They spend about a day and a half trying to investigate the crime themselves, interviewing various villagers, but they realize they need more seasoned help. So they summon in the help of Scotland Yard. Scotland Yard responds and says, we'll send you Chief Inspector Robert Fabian. Robert Fabian at the time was one of Britain's best-known detectives. He had a great rate for solving homicides and various other cases, so he was always in the newspapers. And he spends several weeks up in Lower Quinton interviewing everyone in the village. He has the Royal Air Force do a flyover of the crime scene, taking pictures with high-powered cameras, trying to pick up any clues in the fields that police might have missed. And it's quite bizarre. He runs into a dead end. He cannot find any leads that point to who the killer of Charles Walton is. The one suspect that comes to light, however, in the course of Fabian's investigation is ALFRED John Potter, the guy who had hired Walton. And there are a couple of reasons for this. First of all, Fabian learns during the course of his investigation that Potter was ripping Walton off, in that he wasn't paying Walton all that he was owed for his labors. And the second thing he discovers is that Potter, his statement to police, because he's interviewed many times, his statements to police keep changing. When he was initially interviewed by the Warwickshire Police the night of the murder, he told police that he left the College Arms at about noon and he saw Walton in the field at about 10 past 12. Well, in subsequent interviews with the police, that time starts changing. It goes from 10 past 12 to 12:15, then it goes to 12:20, and then eventually it changes to 12:30. So the time keeps changing. And there's 45 minutes that Potter can't account for, and that's the time that he sees Walton in the field to the time that he returns to his farmhouse that afternoon for his afternoon tea. 45 minutes that he can't account for in all his statements. And so because of this, Fabian theorizes that Potter is the killer. Only problem is he can never actually find any hard physical evidence to suggest that Potter is the killer. Couple of interesting things. One thing Fabian does do is he asks to examine the clothes that Potter was wearing the day of the murder. So Potter turns his clothes over to police, and they're sent to Scotland Yard's forensic laboratory. They're analyzed, and it comes back that there is blood on the knees of Potter's trousers. But the trousers have been scrubbed so clean that it's impossible to tell if it's human blood or animal blood. But ultimately, Fabian can't crack the case. He returns to London several weeks later with Potter as the only viable suspect, but absolutely no evidence to arrest him. And so the case goes unsolved, and Potter lives out his days until, I believe it's 1974, when he passes away. And the case remains an open homicide investigation to this day.